This is episode number 52 of the Web Platform Podcast. I'm your host today, Eric Isaacson, and on our panel is Justin Ribeiro.
Hello, wonderful people.
Danny Blue, who we may not hear.
He's here in spirit.
Yeah.
He's having some connection difficulties. And of course, our guest, Pat Turley.
Hey, everybody.
So, Pat, we brought you on today. I had the pleasure of working with you for probably like a year, I think.
I think so.
You're at Thoughtworks now. You were then, and this is like our year-end episode because July 16th was when I published the first episode last year, which was talking about Ruby on Rails community, and we went through Ruby Nation, which is a regional conference here, and I mentioned Thoughtworks in there as one of the major influences I had for my growth as a developer. So you guys really do a great job at what you do, building things. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Thoughtworks?
Sure. So I've been at Thoughtworks for about 7 years now, and although I'm a developer, day-to-day, I do all sorts of different types of coding. I have had tons of experience doing various other things. I think one of the things people get to know very quickly when they work at Thoughtworks is we all sort of wear many hats. And one of the things I had the luxury of doing, I went to help start our office in Johannesburg, and so it was me and 3 other folks went down there about 4 years ago, and I spent 2 years in South Africa building our office there and throughout the rest of Africa. So I have a whole interesting experience there. And I could talk a lot as much as you guys see fit about the trends that came out of that, because I think there are some very interesting things going on in that region of the world with regards to web development. But 2 years ago, I moved back here to Chicago. I live in Chicago, and I've been working here ever since. Again, still coding all day, every day. Right now, the things that are kind of the latest and greatest in my world, we do the current project that I've been working on for the last almost 2 years actually, is a lot of big data stuff. We work with petabytes worth of data, or as often as we can, I guess, and as much data as we can get our hands on. And I think there are some very interesting things have come out of that. Some very cool ideas have come up for me. And distributed architecture. So I'll probably talk a little bit about distributed computing if we get some time.
That's awesome. So I did have a question about that. So I'm interested to know what's happening in the other parts of the world in web development because I am not as well traveled as most Thoughtworks people. So
again, it's a luxury.
Yeah, I definitely want to know something about that. But I'll tell you a little about our podcast when we've been going through the technologies. And last night I went through our episodes to kind of see what people were downloading and what people were viewing on YouTube. And so we have top 5 episodes. Some of the technologies. Number 1 by far was Polymer. Okay, so web components in Polymer was number 1 of what people really liked. There was over 3,000 views on YouTube and over 2,000 on the audio. Aurelia was next. So again, ES6, web components, and then React would be the next one. So that
React's
was the next biggest.
Super popular, at least throughout our offices and the project that we've got going on. I think we, in our Chicago office alone, there have been 3 or 4 React projects that use it very exclusively.
Yeah, it's getting popular everywhere, I feel, and there's a lot of libraries built on top of it as well. Modern JavaScript with ES6 and ES7, we had Jafar Hussain on, and that one was pretty popular as well. And Famous also, the last Famous one we did on mobile performance. So the Famous framework.
Yep.
So has Thoughtworks or you in particular, have you worked through any of these technologies, and do you kind of feel like that's a common thing for, I guess, from a front-end perspective? Because if I look at these technologies, yes, JavaScript, ES6, ES7, you can have in Node and some other back-end, but it's mostly front-end technologies that are the most popular on ours.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we definitely do a lot of these kinds of things. The interesting thing with a lot of the front-end technologies that are going around these days is there are a lot. There are just so many. I think building a JavaScript framework of sorts is just super common these days. And so what we're seeing is just this kind of revolution in terms of how to build. A lot of times it's the sort of single-page app that feel how to do that well. A lot of what Thoughtworks gets around with is not only just how to build these things and tools to make it look nice or the code to write well, but also how to kind of guarantee the quality that you're looking for in these applications. And many of the traditional testing tools for the web are often kind of insufficient for some of these things. Take a simple any of your simple like Backbone for example. So we're trying to do like a single page app. Testing that, I'm not saying everything has all the problems, but like old school Selenium, which is a thing that came out of some Thoughtworks work a long time ago. It originally was built by basically injecting a bunch of JavaScript onto the page, which didn't interact very well with a heavy JavaScript framework like that. And so I think a lot of things have had to kind of evolve, which has been really excellent. Actually, it's made a lot of the testing tools, the front-end testing tools, more stable and more practical. So you find a lot of people being able to take on any kind of arbitrarily new JavaScript framework, many of the ones that you just mentioned, and leveraging those, but also finding good ways to verify that their applications and things are still correct and are working out. I think that's the reason that all these various different components are really cool and are changing kind of our ecosystem quite a lot.
In terms of the changing of that ecosystem, I mean, so many frameworks, so many things to sort of grok at any particular point in time. I mean, are these little Snowflake architectures becoming a detriment to web developers? I mean, are people having trouble making the bounce around between, React to this to Ember to whatever else everybody else is using?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been in our world. It's been very difficult to kind of stay modern, and some people are going to feel that. They're going to feel like, hey, there's dozens and dozens of front-end tools now that I could use to solve. Sometimes it's one piece of the problem. Sometimes it's a single framework solves like 5 pieces of the problem, and maybe I could use this other one to solve one of those. And how do I fit all these things together? And I'll admit I personally struggle a lot with that. Is staying current, staying modern, and knowing how to plug and play all the various different things. I kind of agree with you. One of the other things I would say, even though, like you said, most of your listeners tend to prefer and are interested in the front-end technologies, there are equally and perhaps many more technologies for back-end development. And I think, a lot of places, a lot of shops, the real trend that I see is that everyone is looking for full-stack developers these days. And so yes, even if you are the person who really has in your head this ecosystem of what is often JavaScript frameworks for fancy and interesting front-end development, you can't. It's hard to just completely ignore the back-end side, and vice versa, right? Like my experience in the past has tended to be more on the back end, but obviously I have to stay aware of, how does React work? What is that tool used for? And at a very minimum, know how each of these players play inside the ecosystem. And I think we just have kind of, I believe we're falling away from a world where there are front-end developers who can completely ignore the back end, and there are back-end developers that can completely ignore the front end. What do you guys think?
Well, I tell you, I know that at Thoughtworks, almost everyone I met there was a full-stack developer, where they were good at a lot of stuff and excelled at one or two things, but they could, if you throw them a task, anything in web development, DevOps, or whether it be front-end development or back-end development, they got it done. I think that is borderline unicorn these days.
Okay.
Borderline.
Okay.
So I don't know how you herded all the unicorns, but please tell us.
Well, the other thing, okay, so ThoughtWorks, yeah, we are a bit of an interesting sort of microcosm that you're not going to find everywhere. I agree. But the other reason that we're in a bit of a different world is because of the startup communities. You never find, well, not never, I'd say never. You infrequently find a job posting for a startup that is looking for just a front-end developer, because they just don't have the money to do these things. And
It's
so
true. It's very true.
I think in the enterprise world, definitely still very common to have those two disciplines split out. But more and more, I think people are looking for full stack folks. But it is far too much for one person to be an expert in all these cases.
I mean, realistically, I mean, you look at sort of the wave of full stack. I mean, is it detrimental to people who are just coming up? I mean, I've been around the block a long time. I can write in a fair amount of languages, back end, front end. But I see a lot of young guys who come up, and it's very daunting. I mean, you're getting thrown into the mix with a stack where, web development used to be, I don't want to say simpler. I think it was difficult even back then. But, now you look at the tooling, and, you have to clone half the internet to get some things to run these days. I mean, is that detrimental to the young guys coming up who are looking to sort of dive into these sort of careers?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with like a blanket no, and then I'll tell you why I believe that. I believe that the difficulty that you're describing, which is of course very real, has sort of changed the way that we all sort of have to operate. I don't know if you've noticed, but in the last 10, 15 years, look at the people. Like, just look at the people you interact with on a day-to-day basis. And are they more often the type of people who want to just crawl away into their cubicles and just shut the world out? Or are they more of the type of people like the three of us that are talking right now? Are they passionate? Are they interested in engaging in the community? Are they social? And that has come about because programming has kind of become cool, right? Like, it's not an ultra nerdy thing to do. It's fun. It scratches all sorts of itches for you. It's very rational. It's also very artistic. It's all of these great things that put together a pretty complex person. And what that's done, sort of the culture shift that's happened over the last, I would say, 10, 15 years, has changed us into a more collaborative culture. Not just ThoughtWorks, by the way. I think everybody is getting to that point. Is you just can't be successful if you have a bunch of people working in isolation. That's just not going to happen. And so what that does is it means that a new sort of young person coming into the development community doesn't have to go and know everything before they become practical and reasonable at their job. They can kind of learn from folks who've been around the block a little bit, such as you guys, and they can sort of learn on the job while being actually useful and bearing real fruit for a company. And I think that's really cool. I think that is what we really want to see. We wouldn't want to. I don't think I feel comfortable in a world where we all have to know everything that's possible, because that just limits us in terms of what we could do.
All of the things. Do them now.
Do all the things. That's maybe what I said.
So, I mean, I think a lot of it is that I think a lot of new people who are just like, oh, I need to change, I need to go into development, what do I do? I think there's an easy tendency to go for the front end because, A, you can visually show something to someone else very quickly and you can see results very quickly, and B, because it's it's very not as structured. There's a lot of areas you can go, and a lot of things like Angular and things you could just plug in and make things work.
Yeah, and I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a great place to start because it also it's about peeling back the onion, right? It tends to be most people's first introduction to the world of technology is the front end, right? Like, nobody just kind of wanders their way into some server and finds a bunch of Ruby code. That just doesn't happen, right? Like, but you may have been like, huh, I wonder how my browser does that, and that's when you realize HTML and CSS, and you're starting to say, but I realize that those two tools don't do enough. And then they start to understand that JavaScript exists, and then it's like, hey, but if I had to write all these things on my own, that would be impossible. Enter some frameworks. And then I think eventually the obvious curious mind eventually asks, how does all this data happen, right? How do we get, how do we store all this information? How do we retrieve it? How do we, what are the other things that occur? Like when I click this button and magically my lights turn on, that's not only a front end task, right? And so I'm thinking of Internet of Things kind of stuff. But it's about that curiosity that eventually sort of overcomes all of us. And I think that innately, to be a really good technologist, one has to have the curiosity to go further. Some people go and they go into more of a depth, and like I think most of you guys have spent a lot of time talking about front end depth and talking about what all these the various different frameworks and how and why they could be used and how they could connect with one another, and that's great. I mean, we need that for sure. And then other people, use a chance to take on some more breadth to find their path, and I think that's really cool. Like you said, I think I think I could speak for most of the company, but Thoughtworks often tends to create people who have a fair bit of breadth, but have some sort of special focuses. Everybody has their own interests, and people tend to have a little bit more depth in particular areas.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think for better or for worse, most of the stuff here has been front end, but I've been trying to throw a lot of back end, and security is a big thing for me. Like I'm really interested in a lot of that, and so my experience has led me to find and follow a lot of people who share the same experiences with me. And so that's why when I started this podcast, I call it the web platform, because that was what O'Reilly was really using to describe all the web technologies.
Yeah, I think the other thing that you didn't mention is that more and more people who are interested in the front end, I think, need to start DevOps. I think that one of the other things I had on my list that we should probably talk about is that I think these days we're getting closer and closer to a world where people don't tend to write as much JavaScript. They tend to write things that compile down to JavaScript. Talk about CoffeeScript. Talk about I looked at the list of things that compile down to JavaScript, and I couldn't fit it in like 6 or 7 pages on my browser. So the point there is that something has to make that create that JavaScript, because I don't hear of anything changing in the browser world where we're going to start actually interpreting CoffeeScript directly, or any of the thousands of other languages that compile down to JavaScript. And so in order to make that happen, a good front-end developer is going to have to know that if they want to write CoffeeScript, they got to do something to turn that CoffeeScript into JavaScript before it gets actually sent to a page.
Well, Dart is a standard now.
Yep, that's true. But not everything will be Dart, and the world will be very fast-moving, I think. But yeah, you're right. We'll see if the browsers or that community keeps up.
I'm half kidding with that. I think it's great. Dart is great, but it's not as popular as some of the other things. So I don't know. It's a good language though.
Yeah, we'll see.
So what are some of the other things that you wanted to talk about? You said DevOps for front end. That is very interesting, because I know that when I teach front end development to people, a lot of times they freak out once I say, okay, now we're going to go to the command line.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. Let's talk about that. I mean, I think that one of the things that has been happening, at least that I see in my neck of the woods, is that people who are interested in the front end often, you talked about sort of younger developers and the sort of next wave of of developers. And one of the things that I see as a pretty common place for how people kind of get into this world is they go to one of the boot camps. We have one here in Chicago called Dev Boot Camp, and I think they have they have many copies of that in other cities. But I think that those boot camps often they try and cover a pretty wide stack, but it is very focused on the front end, right? It's about making something that's beautiful and connectable, and I think that's the thing that hooks a lot of these people. But I think that their approach, as far as I understand it, is to be pretty aggressive with getting into the command line. And you're right. I mean, I think not that you have to start there. I mean, a lot of people. I mean, these days still people tend to be point and click folks, and I'm not going to be the guy that changes that overnight. But I think being comfortable in the command line is a very important thing. It opens up a pretty wide world to you, and even if you're really interested in JavaScript as a language, a lot of things are going to happen if you want to really use a lot of the plugins and kind of manage your repositories and things like that correctly. You're going to need to be in the command line to use tools like Bower or whatever to get what you need to get done. It's almost inevitable.
There's IDEs that hook in those things, like WebStorm. Does a lot of that where you can manage everything in there.
Yeah.
I know .NET is starting to get a lot better with front-end tooling. I haven't played with it myself, so I can't speak to experience, but
it's not bad.
Like
we use it from time to time. Task Runner, a few other tools that come in Visual Studio, so they're pretty solid. But yeah, I mean, the tooling integration overall has gotten better quite a bit, and quite a few IDEs and that sort of land.
As far as using, I mean, I feel like I'm seeing people move away from IDEs in general, but that's a lot for backend development because I don't know. You guys would know better for the front end world. I don't know. I feel like the browser is many front end developers IDE, right? I mean.
I think that people really still cling to the whole. You don't have as many front end developers using Emacs or Vim, right? You have a lot of front end developers using, WebStorm or Sublime are probably the two most popular that I've seen. But now Atom has a 1.0, so it's catching up. It's getting there. So there's a lot of. I think I'm the only person who uses Git in the command line at where I work. I might be mistaken, but I think everyone else uses it, in SourceTree or WebStorm.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I think for DevOps it's really useful because once you SSH into a machine to check builds for even for static apps, you need to know how to use Pico or Nano or some text editor.
Yeah. Just to throw my hat in the ring on that, I'm a notably heavy backend developer and I am definitely a Sublime guy as well. So I think that Sublime and a couple of these other ones that are pretty common these days, like Atom, like you mentioned, those editors are becoming a good thing for both sides of the aisle. So the folks that are really front end heavy, it's simple. You can open a freaking file and edit it. Like you don't have to know that there are modes to this thing and other complexities.
Yeah.
You can just kind of move on.
WebStorm is pretty heavy-handed too. Like it is an IDE, whereas Sublime or Atom are not really full IDEs. They're more just text editors. So
just a kind of sharp text editors, and I think that's been a really good kind of middle ground for me, at least. I don't know. Sounds like some people.
Yeah, I think it's just going to depend on your project overall. I mean, where you work, what size project you're working on, what dependencies you have. I mean, I think that's I think that's the kicker, right? Is that at the end of the day, it's what are you trying to build and what are you trying to do? And I think a lot of times people get stuck in a set of tooling because they're familiar with it, but it's not necessarily the best tooling for the task they're trying to complete. Which goes back to what you were saying, is that it is an ever-increasing amount of things, but sometimes there are better things that do make your job simpler, which is why you have to continue learning. And if you're not continue learning on the platform, whether it's the back end or the front end, you sort of just get wedged out, right? I mean, you don't become as productive. You're not quite as useful to your team. Like, you do have to keep up.
Interesting, like almost every other serious profession. Think about doctors and lawyers and stuff. Like, I don't know why, but it feels like folks don't want to put software developers into that category. But I say screw that, right? Like, I mean, like the whole if we want to be considered real professionals in this world, and I think we should, things like continuing learning, that being a practice. I mean, lawyers and doctors have that as a mandate, right? In order to keep your license, you have to do a certain number of hours and tasks to maintain your license of learning. And I think that even though we don't have a formal structure like that, nor should we, because I don't know that we've ever wanted to be like that. In order to be considered a professional, I think you have to kind of sharpen the knife. You have to always stay aware of what's going on in modern technology.
We danced around this a little bit, but at Thoughtworks, one of the reasons I wanted to get you on here was at Thoughtworks you have this technology radar that comes out. It's a publication that comes out, as far as I can see, correct me if I'm wrong, every like 3 months or so, like 4 quarters, right?
Yeah, I think they attempt to publish every quarter. Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about what it is and what its purpose is?
Sure. So Thoughtworks is for those of you guys who don't know, our company is all over the world. There's all these great statistics about being in like 22 countries with 30 some odd offices, but we're a consulting company, and we do almost exclusively custom software builds. And so in most consulting companies, they do a lot of package implementations, whereas we do all custom software. And so when you do that, you get a lot of breadth of experience. When we have thousands and thousands of projects operating out there, collecting up all of that kind of collective knowledge of the world that we live in is a great task to do. One of the things about the technology radar for us is that no one is paying us to do or say anything. We can say Microsoft sucks if we want to, and I'll say that, but I don't think Thoughtworks will. I think the basic goal of it is to collect up some of our best and brightest minds. We call them the TAB, the Technical Advisory Board, and these are folks like Martin Fowler. These are folks that do our big talks out in the world. They're the people who write the books that are published and are kind of a big deal. And they get together, attempt to get together once a quarter, I believe, and publish the current thoughts of the day. And this the radar is in general. It's structured into 4 quadrants. Those quadrants are techniques, platforms, tools, and then the last one is languages and frameworks. And then each of those quadrants, there's a portion of the radar, one of the rings of the radar that are adopt, trial, assess, and hold, basically representing how much people who are reading this publication should progress with these types of technologies. One of the things that many people ask about about the radar when they look at it at first is they say, hey, I'm looking at the languages section, and where's Ruby? Why isn't Ruby on there? And the basic answer is it very likely was on past radars, and if one of these blips on the radar has stood still for enough time, we sort of remove it from the radar because it's not exactly all that interesting to us anymore. But yeah, in general, it's a collection of thousands of ongoing projects that Thoughtworks does, and our general thoughts on that kind of push through some of our best and brightest minds in the company.
Those things that stay on there for a while, do you ever go back and say, well, maybe we should reassess this, even though we have it off the radar for 2 years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the process to produce these things is pretty pretty significant. They usually solicit quite a lot of ideas from the rest of the company. That period takes quite a while, and then gather everybody together, sort of rank things, and talk about what should be on and what shouldn't. I mean, you can see that right now. I believe there's 92 things on this radar, this current one, and there have been hundreds in the past, and it's a very, very difficult task to put out. What is relevant, what's current, what should people really dig into? Reaching back and pulling out things that have actually changed a lot, that happens quite a bit. But I think the task of not only things should be on there, but then also if you'll notice on the web version, you can click any of the blips and you can see more information about it, including links and things like that, so you can go get a hold of the various different technologies.
We talked a little bit about tools. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the URL is probably relevant. It's very simple. It's thoughtworks.com/radar if anybody's curious and wants to go check it out.
We'll have that in the show notes.
Great.
So we talked a little bit about tools and some languages and some frameworks. What about processes? Because one of the things I loved about working with you guys at Thoughtworks was the processes that you guys had and the people that you had. Those two pieces together worked really well. You guys were from all different offices, and you're able to get things going. And so, like on our podcast, we've talked about certain things like agile methodologies, and we've talked about pair programming. I had Evan Light on for one episode, and he was awesome. He had so many great ideas for pair programming, and that's something I learned from you guys, the pair programming. So, what about processes and processes and people?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess there's a couple of processy type things that I think have kind of come up that are pretty relevant. Let's talk about the front end one that may be controversial in this crowd. Let's see how it goes. One of them is on the radar, and it's under techniques, and it says no PSD. And basically, what they're talking about is not from some group, maybe it's business, maybe it's UX, whatever, however your organization is set up, not delivering as a final document, as a final requirement, a Photoshop document, rather working to get things into a more living ecosystem, and that's the idea. What do you guys think about that?
Oh, so happy with that statement.
Good.
Yeah. No,
I think
I agree totally. Yeah.
I think the idea here is just that, it doesn't mean that all designers need to be completely fluent at HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It does mean that we should work towards live style guides, for example, producing that and agreeing upon basic components on a website is a really good task, rather than saying, make it look exactly like this Photoshop document, because sometimes that's ridiculous on the internet. I think that's one of the ones that I think is a bit of a process change. A lot of folks, the way we lay out a team, it can often be, there's a UX group, and then there's a development group, and maybe like a front end development group, and they don't talk enough, and they don't produce live. I think the idea of a lifestyle guide is probably the coolest thing I've seen. A process thing that I kind of took note of that I thought would be a useful thing is talking about, and I'm not saying we're perfect at this. Matter of fact, we definitely aren't. But talking about products over projects, kind of structuring teams to look after and manage and maintain a product, rather than saying, okay, we need to do this one component on this site. Let's put together a team that works on that quick project, and then they disperse, and then we have another team go and do a different project. I think it's about producing teams that have high levels of cohesion and can work on entire products as best as is possible. I think that's one of my favorite ones that I think was on the radar as well.
All right, that sounds pretty cool. And so, about like what technologies or processes should we not do anymore? That maybe were pretty prevalent a couple of years ago.
I wrote down one in particular that I was like, man, I hope he asks me that exact question. I wanted to talk about it. I already talked about DevOps, and I think that there's a lot of expansion in the world of DevOps that is totally worth everyone's time. Although we're not going into it deeply in this conversation, I'm gonna put one other bug in people's ears that we have on hold, that the notion of a separate DevOps team as a thing to stop doing. The notion there being that teams should take on their own DevOps needs, and sharing between teams is a good idea, and we should totally do that. But having a separate team that says, I will get you servers, and I will maintain them for you, and when you want to go do a production deploy, you'll give me these 5 things, and I will go execute those. But rather having that responsibility be as a part of the development team is a really good idea. And so the statement that we put on hold is separate DevOps team, and I think that's a big one. It's a cultural change, right? It's not any necessarily technical change. It's about how we sort of align ourselves and how we think of our teams. That one's trying to mention.
Yeah, I definitely want to get someone or a few people to talk about DevOps. There's one person in particular I haven't contacted yet, so I won't mention her name, but she did a talk recently locally here about Go and using Go for the front-end development. So it's like tooling for front-end developers.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting to me because of what Go has been noted to be really good at.
Yeah. Fast.
Yeah. So I mean, is there anything else that should be nixed?
I don't know. I mean, I tend to be a pretty positive person, so this is all.
Well, everything comes around. Everything comes around,
yeah.
Right? If it's something like, some popular thing that was used, like for instance, processes, right? For the front end, right now we're doing all this concatenation of files and minification. What happens when HTTP2 comes in, right? And that's like normal.
Right.
Like you don't have a site built on HTTP1 because that's just awful, right? So when that happens, then all our processes are going to change. But at the time, it was really good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The way I would structure almost every negative statement is more the positive statement of the thing that's taking over. I would tell you that I think on a thing that we should stop doing is, again, I mentioned it before, is considering multi-page apps to be the only way of executing. I think I'll be honest. I've fallen into that trap of being like, this is how the web is built. A link makes an HTTP request that refreshes a page. That is the way. And I think that those attitudes are I mean, I have been proven wrong plenty. And it's the advent of Ajax being a much more reasonable pattern is, I mean, that has long since taken over, and old knuckle draggers like me got to just shut up and get on board.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've had one guest in particular who says that the only way to build apps would be to do single-page apps, right?
I wouldn't go that far, but I will. I'm not there yet.
I didn't say it.
I told you I'm going along the path. I'm getting there. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that's a bold statement that's totally worthwhile in this world.
Well, a lot of things are coming back around, because if you look at server-side rendering, right, that used to be the only way that you did it. You didn't render anything on the client, no way, because it was too slow. And we've had a lot of browser updates since then.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I think is a bit dead, and you guys can challenge me if I'm wrong, is actually writing any CSS or JavaScript or HTML. Like, I haven't written a single line of actual CSS, JavaScript, or HTML in years, and it's because I always write in a higher level language. Those things are just the simple basics that that are rendered on the in the browser. But that doesn't mean that I can't write in CoffeeScript and Less and Haml. Of course, I would do that, right? So using tools to build the sort of the boilerplate and mundane bits of the things that you're doing every day is the way that everybody lives these days.
I think it's dangerous too to rely on those things, even though I do. I do it all the time, right? Where I'm always using SAS for any project that I can, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I know CSS. I know
Yeah.
I know it well, so I can go in and debug easily if something happens that's messed up. JavaScript, that's really controversial. I remember there was a Node Up episode just on CoffeeScript, and the two sides of that, like, do we use CoffeeScript or do we use JavaScript? And this was a while ago, but D-Shaw did a great job on that one.
But you're exactly right. Like, just because I say I don't write any of those things doesn't mean I can't process the underlying thing, and that's important. So the back end analogy is when sort of ORMs came about, everybody kind of was just like, okay, I don't need to understand SQL. SQL is dead to me. I'll just interact with my database over this like sort of high level abstraction. And what happened there is actually that was one of the main reasons why people thought that Ruby on Rails was slow. And it was, to be fair, it wasn't as like the Ruby language and various other things weren't as fast as other things. But the real reason people got a lot of performance pain was because they didn't actually understand the SQL that was getting generated underneath the covers. And that will inevitably happen to people in the front end world, is if you don't understand thoroughly the JavaScript that's being generated by your CoffeeScript, or the CSS that's being generated by your SAS, you can't be effective. You really can't ever be like as good of a developer as you otherwise would be.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true to have a analogy for the front end with JavaScript too. There's a lot of Angular hate as far as performance, and people say, oh, you can't get Angular for performance. You need React, or you need something faster. And yeah, you can tweak Angular to get really performant, but
yeah,
it's not as straightforward, let's say, as in React, where it's built in. Where you have a lot of that. So to understand the tools you're using is so important. And if I'm teaching something like CSS, I'm not going to show them a SAS file to start if it's a basic course.
Yep, it's like, and as much as like I get frustrated about the sort of modern computer science education or the modern like human-computer interaction education being too mundane and rudimentary, it is really useful to have some of that background. I talked about the boot camps and stuff, and that's one of the things that they often lack, is that they don't go into like, so the dev boot camp here. I don't know because I've never attended, obviously, but I don't think that it's possible in that short of a period of time that you could learn Ruby, Rails, all the things you need to know about HTML, JavaScript, CSS, all that you could know about SQL and databases. I mean, it's just not possible. And so what they do is they do the best they can to get people operational. But this is sort of my message to all the folks that have gone through that route as a career path, is you have to understand some of the core principles that people are going to school for. I mean, I don't want to sound like I didn't go to school for 6 years to have these kids do it in 6 months. It's fine. It's just that you have to continue to push yourself in terms of education, or else the people who did go to school for 4 or 6 years, whatever, are going to always have the higher possibilities. They're going to be the people who really get it, and their companies are going to continue to look at them as leaders.
Yeah, and when you do these boot camps, and not all of them, they vary in quality depending.
For sure.
But when you do the boot camps, you got to consider that. Let's say you have a week for a boot camp, and you're going through one day, you're going to learn how to do, React, and then the next day, you're going to learn how to do Firebase. And you know, maybe the first day you actually learn JavaScript, right? So you're doing like basic stuff, but you're not learning. You're learning a tool. You're not learning how to build something, and that requires experience. In my experience, that requires a lot of practice and a lot of time and experience.
It's the 10,000 hours rule. Like as much as I think that's generally kind of it's a bit too specific for my tastes, but it does take a lot of time to get to be an expert in these topics. I mean, it just does. It's a fact.
What's your take on this, Justin?
I think expertise is hard. I think there are a lot of people who claim expertise in things that don't quite understand. Are higher level languages the only way forward that generate out the things that we don't necessarily want to deal with? I don't think so. I think I think it's about the case. Like I'm all about what's the use case? Like what is the case that we're trying to solve with this thing? If I'm writing a one-off tool where my backend is serviceable, so let's say it's just Firebase. That's Firebase's whole, click is that you don't need a backend. We are your backend, and it's simple to use. But I agree that you have to know all these things. And I think that's the tough part is that they're not teaching you to do. I mean, are they? Maybe they are. I don't know. I haven't been in school in a long time. I don't think they're teaching you database ops in school these days. And they're teaching you the principles of what sort of define a lot of the sort of computer science education that we may have seen coming up, like when we were younger. I'm probably dating myself at that point. I've got gray here. It's all gray at this point. Yeah, I just think it's very difficult. I think that becoming an expert in all those things, I think people eventually sort of sway one way or the other, where they really like something and then they find their expertise in that thing. And maybe that is in JavaScript. Maybe that's in a higher level language. Maybe that's in a low level language. Some people really want to do C and they love their assembly. And who's to begrudge them that? If that's your expertise, and there's a niche for that, or there's demand for that, I don't particularly see a problem. Does that mean you're going to be an expert in the whole stack? I don't think so. I've never, I just think it's very difficult to find a high degree of expertise in a great number of things, given how quickly everything changes now. I think the high-level language stuff helps a lot when you need to get things out the door, but is it going to give you the best performance? Maybe, maybe not. Do you need to know the next level down so that you get the performance you want? Probably. Do you have time to learn all those things? I have no idea. It's sort of the inception rule. You just keep going into a language until eventually you hopefully wake up and go, oh, I do probably need to ship this eventually.
Yeah.
So let's flip that too. What do you guys think is something that we should definitely adopt today?
Definitely adopt today. I think this is a higher order thing, but I think that for those who aren't doing it in real practice, I think the notion of continuous delivery is the one thing that I think people should focus on. Is being able to, the joke as we were about to go live with this, I was doing a deploy to production while we were chatting, and the fact that I could just click the button and I have so much confidence in that working, I can sit here and talk to you guys without having any real worry. I literally clicked the button and deployed our application to production, and a lot of people were going, but Patrick, that works for small companies. It doesn't work for my massive enterprise. It definitely worked for a massive enterprise. So that's an attitude problem if you're struggling with it, or it's a skills problem, and it's politics as well. So don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I was going to say it's always politics mixed in there.
For sure. Don't let me trivialize that. But I think the notion of continuous delivery makes a lot of other things possible. We talk about things like microservices and yada yada yada, all these different architectural techniques and whatnot, and nothing that we do becomes practical and possible without continuous delivery these days. Everything falls short.
Yeah, it's definitely really important.
Yeah, I like continuous delivery. I mean, I think that's, again, I think it depends on the organization. I mean, we've tried to move a lot of people to continuous delivery because realistically it empowers users as much as it empowers developers, like at the end of the day, in terms of features that can be rolled out, as opposed to, old waterfall styles of like, let's do, 50, 100 requirements in 300 phases of management stack. So I think I like continuous delivery. I think I think there's a learning curve to it. I think the learning curve can be tough for those who haven't done it before. But again, I think the thing that you have to do now more than ever is I think you have to leap. The chasm's not that far. Like you have to leap into it and then start learning it on the fly. Like, and I'm not saying that burn client dollars. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you have to find that leap point and just start to learn it. And I think a lot of people, it can be daunting. You look at sort of the wave of things of Docker, right? I mean, you look at Docker, and Docker's pretty awesome. Like, it's really awesome.
For sure.
For DevOps and sort of setting up environments quickly. But then you look at the command line of it, and you're like, wow, that might seem complicated to anybody who's even used similar tooling in the past. But you have to make the leap because that's realistically where a lot of things are headed, and then you learn. So my takeaway would be keep learning. Like, you have to do it. Like, take a day, a week, or an evening, sit down, read, study, write a whole bunch of horrible code that breaks, break it again, ask questions, break it one more time, and then maybe eventually it'll work, and then you'll learn, and then you, as my dad still says to me, tool up. You have to tool up.
Yep. I think that that was another thing I was thinking about talking about was the notion of rolling forward rather than rolling back. Justin just said it, right, which is like break stuff. I mean, I totally agree and support that notion. And one of the things we talk with our clients a lot about is it's not about if something breaks, something's going to break. Like, stop acting like that's not going to happen. It's about being able to recover quickly and not saying that everything has failed because of one little issue that happens. It's about being able to recover and like pushing forward and fixing that problem and going and just always trucking forward. And I think that attitude of being like, don't be so afraid that you need to feel like, oh, I'm a little worried, I'll just roll this back. Don't worry about that. I'm sorry I did all this. Like, screw that. Get on it, fix it, and move forward. And I think that's a message to individuals as well as to enterprises, for sure.
As far as like the future of of technologies and things like that, what we should look for in the future and test out, some of the things that we've been talking about on the podcast have led me to think that maybe concepts like functional programming, OM, and we had reactive extensions on at one point. Stuff like that would be really good. Other languages for like for the web, like Clojure and Go and Rust, web security, different architectures like Flux. What are your thoughts on some of these things and other things that maybe we should consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of your notion about functional programming is I'll admit that I'm still in my own infancy in that world. I'm trying to get there, and there are some bits of functional programming in many of the different languages that I use, but I haven't yet worked day to day in a language that is a little bit more considered more purely functional. Other than, I mean, we could have the debate about whether JavaScript is a functional language, but let's do that later. That's often an interesting conversation.
Do that on Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. So, but anyways, I think that being able to wrap just me individually, I'd like to be able to wrap my head around that paradigm better and feel more fluent in that world, because I think that A lot of people are talking that way, and in the same way that I personally moved from Java to Ruby, and then like my path was I recognized more front-end technologies after that. I think there's a similar story there to the functional paradigm, and that's actually moving off into the front end as well. ClojureScript, you name it, right? A lot of very, very functional patterns ending up very, very close to the front end, and that's really cool. So I think for me, personally, I have a lot of work to do, but it's clear that that's one of the next paths.
Awesome. So what else haven't we covered as far as like, technology radar or things that we should, consider, not consider? What should we be doing?
Let's see. One thing I thought I'd give a bit of a pitch for that I have really liked, and it's been a bit of a help for me. I guess a lot of people separate the front and the back end actually more formally these days than they used to. Things like back in the days when you and I were working together, it was the same code base, and our Ruby application was rendering code that you were working on, and it was very tightly coupled. And a lot of times these days, people tend to make that separation a little bit more clear and work over an API boundary, and the back end is more officially a back end, and it only produces JSON or something like that can be consumable by the front end. That being so, I won't say whether I approve or disapprove of that. I think it's a complex topic. But I think that one of the tools that has been really beneficial for that for me has been a tool called Postman, which is it's just a Chrome app, I guess. But we've been talking about it a lot. We use it a lot on my team because it's basically a tool that gives you a nice interface to be able to create RESTful. Well, I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be completely RESTful, but RESTful URL, RESTful requests to a backend. The reason this is awesome is because applications aren't as simple as just links. They're obviously more complicated. The HTTP protocol is thorough and complex, and links are just which being GET requests are only one piece of the pie. And I think figuring out and really getting familiar and having a nice interface for doing the rest of it is a really cool thing that Postman does really well.
Does Postman also handle like WebSockets or WebRTC?
I don't know. I haven't done that, so I can't answer that thoroughly without opening.
Because I haven't found an interesting debugger for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. The last WebSockets work that I did was, I was similarly so. I did a lot of console logging and just reading outputs, and it was relatively painful.
Yeah, I don't know if Postman does that, but I love Postman. That's a nice, I second that like wholeheartedly.
Cool.
I'm gonna have to check it out. I'm a Postman newbie.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is like a lot. The other thing that I do a lot of, and I'm sure you guys will have a chance to do that. Not all applications that we work on are like really heavily customer facing. The one that I work on, although we have a web front end and we do a lot of cool work there, our highest priority is that we're an API that other people use for various reasons, and so Postman's a nice way to provide sort of like a useful, usable UI without any real work to our API, so that folks that are a little less technical can interact with that and don't have to get like deep into like curl or wget or things like that are a little bit daunting, to be honest.
Awesome. This has been a great show. This is like I said, this is our full year, 52 weeks of the Web Platform Podcast. So glad to have you on, Pat.
Congratulations, you guys. That's an amazing feat. I really think you guys are awesome.
Thanks, man. So if people want to talk to you more about Technology Radar, Thoughtworks, or just chat about any type of web development stuff, how can people find you? What's your Twitter handle and all that?
Twitter handle is Patrick_Turley. I'll go ahead and give out an email. Why not? Screw it, right? Email. My email is turtle@thoughtworks.com. So you can just dump that in there, ask me whatever you like, and I'll do the best I can to respond.
You opened the door.
I know, right?
All right. Well,
no,
thanks for coming on,
weird,
Pat.
though, people, okay, I don't know anything about the your listeners. Are they great like this, or should I be concerned?
All of our listeners are awesome, so you don't have to worry.
Awesome and crazy. Excellent. Yeah, that'd be great.
We're web developers, right? We're all crazy.
Just a little.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.